Hi there, and welcome to a project video where you'll build and deploy a modern Next.13 website with Framer Motion and Tailwind CSS. Metaverse. We have been hearing about it and imagining it for quite some time. Now we'll make metaverses, a metaverse concept landing page. Building this single web app with me will give you the knowledge needed to build any website you can imagine. Many tutorials teach you how to create a website with a navigation bar, a few divs, and a footer. Boring, right? Today, you'll learn how to develop a professional website using the most in-demand technologies and deploy to the internet so you can share it with your friends, potential employers, and put it on your portfolio. This video is perfect for you if you want to learn how to transform a Figma design into a fully functioning website, if you want to improve your CSS skills, and if you want to learn how to create a modern and responsive website. And best of all, while building this beautiful website, you learn the most modern technologies today: Next.js 13, Tailwind CSS, and Framer Motion. Nothing is better than learning these technologies on a real-world project. You might be wondering, what are the prerequisites for building such a fantastic website? This course is entirely beginner-friendly. We're going to start simple and then move to more complex concepts. I'll explain every step of the way, from arranging the files, creating functional components, using hooks, and writing clean code, all the way to deployment. This design has been created by the outstanding designers of the 1 Week Wonders agency. Show them some love by checking their other designs. The link is in the description. While developing this app, you'll learn React project architecture and clean code best practices, Next.13 application structure, fundamental CSS properties to master Flex using Tailwind CSS, from soft and pleasant animations to complex gradients using Framer Motion, perfectly placed media queries for satisfactory responsiveness covering almost all devices. And at the end, you'll learn how to deploy your website to incredibly fast servers and give it a custom domain name. If this video reaches 20,000 likes, I'm recording another modern UI and UX video. Oh, and I almost forgot. We are running a special Black Friday sale on jsmastery.pro. There, you can get 3 complete courses. A 10-hour course in which you can master all essential parts of modern JavaScript to have a solid foundation to learn React. An 8-hour course where you build a Netflix clone and learn the best industry practices for React.js. A 12-hour course in which you build an NFT marketplace and learn the bleeding edge of Web3 technology. If you've never bought one of my courses before, you can save $250 off my courses by getting them in the special Black Friday bundle. For those who already bought some courses, you can get 40% off the other courses and complete your skill stack. The sale lasts only until the 29th of November, so click the link with the discount in the description and get the courses while you can. If you're watching this video after the sale is over, you can still get our usual YouTube subscriber discount. With that said, let's dive into the video. Before we start building out our project, let's first get the hosting and the domain name for a new site, your portfolio, or any website you'll create in the future. Hostinger is my personal recommendation, and right now they're offering crazy Black Friday deals, so I simply needed to show this to you. The link with an extra discount is in the description. Let's click the Claim Deal button. And as you can see, right now, Hostinger offers an 80% discount for a 4-year subscription to the premium shared web hosting plan. For about $2 a month, you can host 100 websites and you'll even receive a free domain. This deal is of course valid only for a limited amount of time. Hostinger offers an excellent price-to-quality ratio, high-speed servers, and most importantly, 24/7 chat support. This Black Friday deal is an absolute steal. I mean, $2 a month for hosting 100 websites, and you also get a free SSL certificate, which means you'll have HTTPS security. You also get a free email and, most importantly, a free domain name. All of the features you'll get with this hosting plan will make all the difference. Since I've partnered with Hostinger, they decided to give you an even bigger discount. You can find the link and a unique discount code in the description. Enjoy! Once you visit the link in the description, click Claim Deal, and then Add to Cart. Here, we have to choose the period of our hosting. With the crazy discount going on right now, I'll definitely choose 48 months to save the most money. And down below, you can choose your payment method, but even more importantly, you can enter a custom coupon code I prepared for you. So just click right here and type JavaScript Mastery, all caps, no spaces, and click Apply. There we go, the coupon has been applied and you can safely make a purchase. After you complete the checkout, you'll be redirected to the Hostinger's dashboard. I'll see you there. This is your guided setup. So let's go ahead and click Start Now. In here, you can choose to create a new website, which is exactly what we're doing in this video. Finally, you can choose WordPress, Hostinger Website Builder, or you can skip and create an empty website. Finally, you can claim your free domain name, which you got with your special deal. In this case, I'm going to click Select, and let's try to get Metaverses, and let's go for .com. If we search for this, most likely it's going to be taken. Yep, this is such a good one. But if we go with something like Metaverses Madness, as that's what we have on our homepage, and click Search, you can see this domain is available. Of course, you'll have to get something different because I'm getting this one for myself. You can pause this video, think about the domain name a bit, and then select it right now, or you can even skip this process and then choose the domain name later on. But with that said, let's click Continue. In here, you can choose your server location and click Finish Setup. There we go. MetaversesMadness.com is being registered. Perfect. I want you to instantly dive into the development process and allow you to focus on learning what really matters. That's why I prepared a special starter repository for you. This repository just contains a simple setup, but you will code the actual logic, components, and the layout from scratch. The link to download the starter repo is in the description. Once you download it, simply right-click it and then extract it. You can extract it on your desktop, rename it to Metaverses, and finally drag and drop it into your code editor of choice. In this case, we'll be using the most popular editor out there, Visual Studio Code. Once you do that, you'll see that we have quite a few files and folders right here. So let's explore them one by one. First, we have the app folder, the most important folder in Next.js's 13 structure. Yes, you heard that right, we're using the latest and greatest of what Next 13 has to offer. That's why you can see a special head.js file, a layout file, and a page.js file. Inside of the page, I've immediately imported all of the sections we'll be using throughout our application. But as you can see, these sections are just empty components. Nothing is in there right now. It is completely empty, and you're going to code the entirety of all of these sections and components on your own. Of course, with my help by watching this video. Great. So as you saw, we have app with 3 files. We have the components, which all of them are entirely empty. We have the constants folder. In here, I prepared for you some content we'll be using from our design. That way, you don't have to necessarily copy and paste every single thing. I have created constants that we can simply reuse in our code. And you can look at this constant and learn something from it as well. This is how you would structure applications in the real world as well. Extract the data from the code. Then we're moving into the pages folder. This folder is no longer being used in Next 13, so we won't need it at all. Finally, we have the public, where we have some assets from the design, and we have some sections right here as well, which we already explored. All of them are empty. With that said, we also have the styles. So if you look at the globals.css files, in here, I extracted some of the styles from the design, mostly different gradients that we'll be using. But that's about it. We're also using Tailwind, importing it right here. And finally, we've created an index.js file inside these styles where we extracted most commonly used styles. So if you're using this specific padding all across your application, you don't want to retype this all across the board. You can simply call it paddings. And that way, you add this class name and it's going to apply all of the class names right here. The same thing goes for the hero heading. As you can see, that's about it for the styles. And finally, we also have the utils. As you know, we'll be using Framer Motion for this project. So in here, we prepared some of the most common variants of animations we'll be using. For example, there's a special function for slide in. We also have the stagger container, different variants for texts, and so on. While using these in the code, we're going to revisit this motion and then explain all of the code that is in this file. Great. With that said, we can close all of the open files in the starter repo, and you can see that that is about it. That is our entire structure. And as I've mentioned, we are using Next.13 right now in the experimental stage. We can also see that if we check out the package.json, Next 13.0.3, also React 18, and Framer Motion. But as you can see, we have no extra dependencies besides that. The absolute entirety of the application will be coded by you without any extra dependencies. Isn't that great? Now that we know the structure of our Next.13 application, we are ready to start developing it. We can go inside of the app and then inside of the page. Right here, you can notice that we're of course going to start with the navbar. Before we dive right in, it is important to mention that there's also a head, which is a simple head component allowing you to change the title of your website and also add a link to the favicon. But inside of the layout, we can also add some additional things. So in here, for example, we're adding a special font that is going to make your application entirely different. Of course, this is the font straight from the design. Great. Now we can dive into page and we can actually run our application. To do that, we can open up our terminal by going to View and then Terminal, and then we can run npm install. Make sure that you are in the root of your directory. This is going to install the node modules for all of the packages, but as we said, we don't have many. It's just React, Next, and Framer Motion. So these should install pretty quickly. And finally, we can run npm run dev to run our application on localhost 3000. You can control-click the localhost 3000, and immediately it's going to open up in your browser. I think that now you can see what I meant when I said that you're going to get an empty slate. You have nothing here. It is just a simple layout, but we, of course, on our own have to code every single part of this application. With that said, let's put our browser side by side with our editor. Let's do it somewhere like this, and then we can collapse our editor as well. We can close our terminal, collapse our sides, and we can control-click into the navbar to start developing it. Immediately by diving into our navbar component, we can see something that's quite new and unusual. A string that says use client at line 1 of our file. What is that? Well, if we look into Next.13 beta docs, we can render the server and client components part, and if we scroll right here, we can see that all components inside of the app directory are React server components by default. This allows you to automatically adopt server components with no extra work and achieve great performance right out of the box. This means that we no longer have to write that const get server-side props and similar. It's going to work right out of the box. And in here, they dive into explaining why this is beneficial. And trust me, it is. The apps are much better, much faster, cacheable, and more predictable in size. But sometimes you won't be able to use those components because we have to use what's on the client side. We have to use React, use state hooks, and so much more. So in here, they give us a convention on how to transform the server-side component to a client-side component. Simply create a file and add a use client directive at the top of the file. Then we can use all regular React client-side functionalities such as useStateHooks. As you can see right here, you only need to mark components as useClient when they use client hooks such as useState or useEffect. Usually, it's best to leave components that do not depend on client hooks without the directive so that they can automatically be rendered as a server component when they aren't imported by another client component. This helps ensure the smallest amount of client-side JavaScript. Great. With that said, we can right here import motion from Framer Motion. You're going to notice in some of these files, we don't necessarily use useState or useEffect hooks, but some of the dependencies we are using use them, and therefore we also have to add useClient at the top. Great. With that said, we can also import our styles by saying import styles from /styles. If we control-click into this, you're going to see that this is an object containing strings that we can more easily use. Now, if we go back to our navbar, we can also import something known as nav variants coming from /utils/motion. We can also immediately control-click to check it out. So by working on the navbar, we are immediately diving into Framer Motion. And this right here is called a variant, and it shows you how we can modify the animation. So there's going to be some properties while the animation is hidden, and then when it is showing. On hidden, we want to have the opacity of 0, and we want to have it moved by -50 pixels. But when it is showing, we want to have it to 1, and then position it at 0 pixels. Transition is going to be of a type spring, which means that it's going to bounce a bit. We have the stiffness and the damping of the spring as well. So finally, let's go back to the navbar and let's make use of all of those imports. Immediately, our wrapper div for the navbar is going to be motion.nav. By importing motion from Framer Motion, you'll get access to this special variable or special element that you can use. Motion.something. It can be a nav or it can be a div. Essentially, you're going to create that element and then you can pass special props to it. First of all, the most important prop is the variance prop. So we can say variance, and that's going to be equal to nav variance. You can code them inline, meaning if we didn't create this special variable, you would simply create an object, and then you could use it right here. But as you can see, this can get messy pretty quickly as we have about 30 lines, and we haven't yet created anything in the code. So I prefer to keep these in a special file right here under utils motion. We divide some kind of logic for animations from the actual presentation. Then initial state of this div is going to be hidden. While in view, we want to set it to a string of show. And finally, we're going to give it a class name. Now this is going to be a template string where we want to render the styles.xPaddings, padding y or p8-8, and then relative. Now, you might notice a couple of different things right here. First of all, we are using the styles variable or styles object. There, as I mentioned a couple of times so far, we created some often used styles. So xPaddings is simply going to provide px6, and then on small devices, px16. But now, if you're really confused about this px, py, and so on, these all are class names created by Tailwind. So as you can see, this class name of py8 simply gives you padding top 2 and padding bottom 2. If you haven't used Tailwind before, no worries at all. Tailwind is a utility-first CSS framework packed with utility classes, such as Flex, PT4, Text Center, and so on. Essentially, you don't have to create special style sheets. You just write CSS as classes right on your elements. This makes it so much easier to create CSS layouts. So if you're wondering what any of these class names mean, simply go to Tailwind CSS docs and then search for that class. In this case, we can search for py, and immediately you can see that this is for adding vertical padding. So throughout this entire video, if you see a class name that sounds unfamiliar to you, simply go to Tailwind CSS docs, go to search, and then type it right here, and it's going to give you a great explanation. Great. Now let's go back to building our application. If we now reload our application, you should already be able to see that the navbar scrolls or appears from the top. Let's check that one more time. There we go. So we're using the nav variant where it's coming from -50 pixels, meaning from the top, and it's sliding all the way to the bottom. Great. Now inside of there, let's create another div. This div is going to be a self-closing div. It's going to have a class name equal to absolute. It's going to have a W-50%. That stands for width. It's going to have an inset property of 0 and a gradient -01 class name. Now you can already see a light gradient appear right there, but it's not that visible because we haven't changed the background color of our background. To do just that, we can go back to page, and right here we can add a class name to this div. We can say class name is equal to bg-primary-black and overflow-hidden. If we save this, now everything is going to become dark, and now this light gradient is more apparent. Below this self-closing div, we're going to have another div. This div is going to have a class name equal to, it's going to be a template string, so let's do it like this. Inside of there, we're going to have styles.innerWidth. And we're going to also have mx-auto for margin X. We're going to also have a flex property to make it a flex div, and we're going to use justify between, as well as gap-8. Now, inside of this div, we want to render an image. So let's create a self-closing image tag that's going to have a source equal to /search.svg. Now, if we save this, you can see that we have a huge search icon in our navbar. Let's give it an alt property that's going to say search. And let's also give it a class name equal to w- inside of square brackets 24px, h-24px, and object-contain. If we save this, that's going to make it just a bit bigger, but that's because we're on 400% zoom. So if we reset this, this is going to seem a bit better. Below that image, let's add an h2 tag. That h2 is going to have a text of metaverses in there. That h2 is also going to have a class name of font-extra bold, text-24px, leading-30 pixels, and text-white. Now, if we save this, you can see that appear on the right side. And so far, we haven't yet tapped into the design of our project. We're just creating the navbar. But now that we're diving into different sections, we have to see what are we building. So let's open up the Figma design file for our project. The main promise of this video was to teach you how to take a Figma design and turn it into a brilliant website. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. Down in the description, you can find the entire design file for this application. As you can see, this is the website we'll build. I'm going to quickly bump this up so we can zoom it in even more. There we go. Metaverse Madness. It is a beautiful website built around the theme of virtual reality. So we're going to have a simple navigation bar. We're going to have a huge hero section and an image. Then we're going to also have some text. And then we'll be able to choose the world we want to explore. As you can see, here is the virtual reality icon. And the point of this website is to allow users to explore different virtual worlds. We also have some more information, like a section that gives you some steps on how to use it, more selling points, a new world and more realistic, a huge heading with this great globe asset that we'll also use. We have some blog posts about the platform. We also have a review section right here, or maybe a word by the founder section. And finally, the last call to action and a footer. Great. Now we can go all the way to the top and we can focus on creating this great navbar and then diving into the hero section. So now I'm going to put this on the side. I'm going to zoom out a bit, and hopefully we can still see it just a bit while we're developing it. Now, if you're wondering about how to get specific styles for some elements, you simply have to dive deep into that element. For example, I dived into this heading tag that we just wrote right here. And then you have to go to inspect to be able to see some CSS properties that you can use. So we can immediately see the font family, the font style, color, and so much more. Great. The same thing is going to go for this text as well. This one is going to be a bit different, and other text pieces as well, but also images. So right here, you can download all images by going to export and then doing that right here. But we prepared all of the assets for you, so they're going to immediately be right inside of the public folder. Right here, we have people 0, people 1, and so on. And we also have all of the planet images. There we go. That is looking great. Now we can close all of those images, and we can go back to our navbar. We created the heading, but now we also have to add this hamburger icon. So right below our heading, we can add a self-closing image tag, and we're going to render a source called /menu.svg, give it an alt tag that's going to say menu, and give it a class name that's going to say w-24 pixels, that's for the width, h-24 pixels, that's for the height, and then object-contain. If we save that and go back to our site, we can see a beautiful navigation bar. Of course, when working with designs, you're in most cases going to get just the desktop version and the mobile version. In this case, we have just the desktop one, but you have to make your design adapt to all different sizes. So right here, we are on some sort of a weird size, maybe a tablet size, but still, everything fits nicely in the view. And with that said, we're done with our navbar. So we can close it, and we can dive into maybe the most important section of our entire application, the hero section. That's going to be this huge Metaverse Madness text with this weird D, as well as this huge image right here. So let's go ahead and get started right now. In most cases, we're going to have similar imports. We'll have to import motion, styles, and then some utils from motion as well. So let's dive into the navbar, and let's simply copy all of the imports we've used there, and let's paste them inside of the hero JSX section. In this case, we won't need nav variants, but we're going to use the slide in property, the stagger container property, and the text variant property. Great. Our hero section is going to be just that, a section. That section is going to have a class name equal to, it's going to be a template string of styles.y paddings. On small devices, padding left of 16, and usually padding left of 6. Now, if we go back and save that, you can see that that moved the hero section a bit more inward, and then we can create a motion div. Motion.div. You already learned that motion div accepts some properties, mainly variants. So right inside of here, we can give it a stagger container variant. We have to properly spell it in the import as well, and we can see what that variant does. You can see that it doesn't have any properties on hidden, but on show, it's going to call two sub-transitions, such as staggered children and delayed children. This makes our motion div a container div, inside of which we can render children animations. That is quite cool. Now, initially, it's going to be hidden, so we can say hidden. While in view, we want to show it. We can also set the viewport property. It's going to have an object inside of it. We're going to set once, false, and amount of 25. Now, I know that this might sound weird to you. What are we talking about? What kind of viewport, once, amount, and so on? So let me show you how we can learn about all of the libraries out there. Right now, we're learning about Framer Motion. But what if it's another library? What if it is a library for galleries, calculators, calendars, or anything really? You need to be able to read documentation. So how would I do it? I would go to google.com. I would Google Framer Motion documentation, search for it, and then you're going to see the first link that appears right here. In the documentation, we can try to look for examples, simple examples for animation, gestures, components, transforms, and more. And finally, search for viewport. Immediately, it's going to lead you to a scroll-triggered animation section. Motion also provides a while in view property that defines a visual state to animate to while a component is in the viewport. So we can say viewport once and then it's going to animate. So as you can see, once we scroll through it, it is going to become visible. Now you can set it to once, meaning that once we reach to it, it's not going to animate again. See? The orange appeared, and now if we move ahead, it's always going to stay there. But you can also change that to appear multiple times every time that you scroll through it. That is another possibility. So in here, we set viewport false, amount 0.25. So in here, we said we don't want it to render only once. It's going to be rendered every time that it is in the viewport. Now, this div is also going to have a class name equal to. That's going to be a template string of styles.innerWidth. It's also going to have a margin X set to auto. It's going to be a flex container, and it's going to be a flex column. Inside of there, we're going to have one more div. This div is going to have a class name equal to flex, justify-center, items-center, flex-col, relative, and z index of 10 to make it appear above our background. Inside of there, we can render our motion.h1. So this is our first time that we're animating an h1 property. Inside of there, it can say metaverse. We're going to give it a variant or variants that's going to call a function called text_variant 1.1. Now we can control click it to go into that. And you can see that we have a delay. So we have created a special function text_variant that's going to create a variant, but we can also pass a delay to it. So in this case, we're setting the delay to be 1.1 second. So now if we save it, of course, we're not going to see anything yet because we haven't provided the class names. So let's do just that. Class name is equal to styles.hero heading. If we save that, we get a bit more space, but we cannot really see anything here. So let's continue with another motion div below our motion h1. That's going to be a motion.div component. It's going to have a variant, again, inside of the props of that element. Variance is going to be equal to text_variant, and we're going to pass in a delay of 1.2 seconds. So it's going to render just a bit after this first initial h1. We can also give it a class name equal to flex, flex-row, justify-center, and items-center. Inside of there, we want to render this madness thing. So first we rendered metaverse, and then we want to render the madness. So inside of that motion div, we can show an h1, a regular one this time, that's going to have a class name equal to of styles.hero heading. And we can say MA. So just the first two letters. Now we have that crazy D, which can be a div, and it's going to be a self-closing div tag with only one property, a class name of styles.heroDtext, like this. We can, of course, control click to go into it, and you can see the styles we used to make this happen. It's going to have some properties, but mainly we're making this happen with the borders, believe it or not. So this right here is a div, and with the ability of borders, we're creating it into a D. So on the left side, it's not that complicated. It is just a regular border. On top and bottom, it is also not that complicated, but then on the right side, we have to make it rounded. Again, really, really simple. You just give it a rounded -r and then specific pixel property. Great. Finally, below that, we can duplicate the h1, and we're going to finish the word. That's going to be ness. And if you reload the page, the text is going to appear. So right here, we have metaverse madness. Let's reload it one more time and notice how the first word appears first, and then after 100 milliseconds, the madness appears as well. That is cool. You can also notice the navigation bar flowing in. Great. Now below this motion div and below this regular div, we can create another motion div. This motion div is going to have a variance property equal to slide in. Then we can provide it a string, slide in from right. It's going to be a type of animation called tween, and also it's going to be 0.2 delay and then 1 second duration. This is a special function we created. We can go into it and you can see that this allows us to pass props to it, but then based on those props, we can immediately change the direction that we want to animate to or animate from. We also pass different transitions such as type, delay, and duration, so we can specify and make our animation unique just by calling a function right here and then passing different props. This div is also going to have a class name equal to relative, w-full. On medium devices, it's going to have a -mt, meaning negative margin top of 20 pixels, and also negative margin top of 12 pixels when we're not on medium devices. Inside of this motion div, we want to have a regular div. And what we're doing, of course, is doing the image that's going to be shown below the text, just so you know. Great. This div is going to have a class name equal to absolute, w-full, h-300 pixels, hero-gradient, rounded-top left-140 pixels, z-index of 0, and then -top -30 pixels. So now we're positioning this absolutely placed div. Inside of there, we want to render the image. So let's go into this div. Let's render the self-closing image tag. Source is going to be set to cover.png. Alt is going to be set to cover. And finally, class name is going to be set to w-full. On small devices, height is going to be set to 500 pixels. Usually, height is going to be set to 300 pixels. It's going to have an object cover property. It's also going to be rounded-TL-140 pixels. It's going to have a z-index of 10, meaning it's going to show above other elements. And it's going to be set to relative. Now, if we save this, and if we reload the page, we can see the image slide in. Now, I noticed right here, it's not supposed to say rounded-top-140 pixels, just rounded-TL, as in top left. There we go. So now we get this beautiful curve. And again, notice the animation and the timings between those animations. First, we get the image. And then we get the gradient, the navbar, and then nicely, and then finally the text. Beautiful. Now we also need this beautiful stamp button right here that you can see. We can click it, and then we're going to scroll down to the section below. So to implement that, we can go below our image, still inside of the div, and we can render an anchor tag. This anchor is going to have an href equal to #explore. That's going to be our next section. Inside of there, we can render a div. That div is going to have a class name equal to w-full, flex, justify-end. On small devices, negative margin top, meaning minus margin top, mt, -70 pixels, of course, inside of square brackets. And then again, on regular devices, -mt, -50 pixels. Padding right is going to be set to 40 pixels. It's going to be relative, and it's going to have a z-index of 10. Finally, inside of there, we can render an image, a self-closing tag, that's going to have a source equal to /stamp.png. It's going to have an alt tag equal to stamp. It's going to have a class name equal to, on small devices, w-155 pixels. Usually, width is going to be 100 pixels. On small devices, the height is going to be set to 155 pixels, and usually the height is going to be 100 pixels. And it's going to have a property of object contain. Now we have to close this class name and save it, and if you reload the page, you should be able to see it appear right here, but we cannot see anything yet. So let's try to debug it. We're closing our section here, our two motion divs, and this div as well. Now, this div right here should be a gradient div, like the one we used in the navbar, remember? This is a self-closing div, because it's just going to render a blur, meaning some light happening right there. So if we go back to the hero section, we need to automatically close this div as well. And then we have to remove the closing div here. If we save this, you'll be able to see a nice gradient appear. That is that self-closing div. And now we're closing everything where we should. So now we can see the stamp appear right here as well. That is great. Now we have a beautiful navigation bar and a hero section. Let's expand it to its full glory. There we go. This is looking great. And we can click right here to scroll to the bottom section. I'm going to collapse it once again. And with that said, we're completely done with the hero section. It might look a bit empty right now, but as you can see, its main point is to guide you from this hero to the text below. So going back, we can close our hero and our motion, and we can control click to go into the about section. Inside of here, we can also import similar things as we have inside of the hero. So let's just copy it and let's go back to about and let's paste it. We're gonna need motion. We're gonna also need a new component. So we can say import typing text from /components. This is a component we are yet to create. As you can see right now, it is completely empty. We're gonna also need some styles. And instead of slide in, we're gonna import the fade in variation and the stagger container. That's coming from utils motion. Now, this section is going to have a class name equal to, that's going to be a template string of styles.paddings. We're going to also have a relative and z-10 position. Inside of there, we want to render a gradient. So that's going to be a self-closing div that's going to have a class name equal to gradient 02 and then a z-0. As you can see, it just added this light right here. Then we're going to render a motion.div. This div is going to have a variant, so we have to add it inside of the property. Variance equal to stagger container. Initially, so initial is going to be set to hidden, and then while in view, we want to show it. Viewport is going to be same as before, once set to false, and then amount set to 0.25. Finally, it's going to have a class name equal to, that's going to be a template string of styles.innerWidth, mx-auto, styles.flexCenter, and finally flex-call. There we go. So this is our wrapper div. Inside of there, we want to render a typing text self-closing component. We're going to pass two things to it. We're going to pass the title, that's going to be equal to one vertical line, space, about metaverses. And then also text styles is going to be set to text center. These are props that we're passing to the typing text component. Right now, it is a simple text property, but let's go into it and let's implement the typing text component. That's going to be this text right here. So what we can do is we can make both of these components accept two props, the title and the text styles. Then let's work with the typing text first. So that's going to be this one right here. Instead of a P, it's going to be a motion.p component. It's going to have a variance as we always do with motions. So variance is going to be set to text container. Now, this is a variant, of course, coming from our utils. So we can go back to the about and we can copy all of the imports and paste them here. Now, we won't need the typing text nor the styles. We simply need the text container utils. And of course, the motion, so we can use the motion.p. Now, this is going to animate, but we still cannot see anything inside of here because we haven't yet returned anything. So what we can do is we can also give it a class name, make it a template literal string, give it a font-normal, text-14 pixels for the size. We can also give it a text-secondary-white color. And finally, we can pass in the additional text styles coming from props. Now, inside of there, it's not going to be just a self-closing one. We can create an array. So that's going to be array.from title. This is going to split the characters in the title into an array. And then we want to map over those letters. We're going to get each letter as the first element of the map and then the index. Now, for each one, we want to instantly return a span element. So instead of a curly brace here, use a parenthesis for instant return. And we want to return a motion.span. Now, that motion span is also going to have a variant property. So that's going to be variance of text variant 2. And the key is going to be equal to index. Now, this text variant 2 is also coming from utils. So we can just take it from here. Now, we still cannot see anything, and that's because we haven't yet rendered the actual letter. So inside of the motion span, we can check if letter is triple equal to an empty space, then we want to render this set of ASCII characters. And if not, we can just render the letter. Now, if you're wondering what these characters are, let's simply Google it. And you can see that this is a Unicode character for a no break space. I think it's going to make more sense once you see it on the website. And you can see it right here. If we zoom in, it's going to be about metaverses. And there is that character. It's just a bit smaller than the actual space. Great. We copy that exactly from the design. Beautiful. Now we can go back and we can go to our about. Typing text component is done. The next thing we have below the typing text is going to be another motion.p. That is for this huge block of text that you can see right here. That motion.p is going to have variance set to fade in, up, also tween, also 0.2, that's going to be for the delay, and then 1 for the duration. We can also give it a class name equal to empty-8 pixels, also font-normal. On small devices, text-32 pixels, text-20 pixels, text-center to center it, and text-secondary-white for the color. Finally, inside of there, we can render a couple of different spans to show this text. As you can see, there's a couple of bolded elements. So for these bolded elements, we can render them inside of a span. So let's first copy the entire text by right-clicking it and then clicking copy. We can paste it right here. And now let's separate the things that are bolded. You can see right here, metaverse is bolded. So we're going to put it in a new line. Then we have madness of the metaverse. Let's also put that in a new line. There we go. Then we also have VR and finally explore. So let's put VR in a new line and then the word explore. We want to replicate this exactly as it is in the design. Now for these, we want to wrap them in a span element, and that span is going to have a class name equal to font-extra bold and text-white. Great. I can put the word metaverse there. And we can also duplicate this span and replace it right here, the madness of the metaverse. So we can put it inside of here. We can duplicate it one more time, and we can use it for VR this time. So let's wrap it in a span as well. Let's do it properly, of course. And finally, the word explore. So we can copy it and we can paste it right here. Now, if we save this and go back, you can see our text appears right there. But you're going to notice that we're missing spaces in between those extra bolded letters. So what we can do is we can now bring everything in one line. So metaverse is, and then you can provide this space right here. If it is in one line, then the space will be added. If it is in a new line, then the editor is going to cut it out. So let's simply put everything in one line and provide the spaces as you would normally. There we go. We can keep repeating that until we have everything in one line with appropriate spaces. There we go, and there's one more left. Perfect. Here is the text. Now, if we zoom it out, we can see about metaverses. Metaverse is a new thing in the future where you can enjoy the virtual world. This text is looking great. And now if we click right here, we cannot yet scroll, but we're going to implement that really, really soon. Great. With that said, we also have the image on the design right here. And that image is going to be the arrow to scroll down. So going back, below this p tag, we're going to render a motion.img. It's going to have variants, as we always do. That's going to be fade in, up, and then tween. It's going to be 0.3 this time, and then 1. 0.3 just to make it a bit different from the 0.2 for the text. That way, it's going to appear that it's rendering after the text. We can also give it a source equal to arrow-down.svg, an alt tag equal to arrow down, and finally a class name equal to w-18 pixels, h-28 pixels, object-contain, and margin top of 28 pixels to divide from the text above. It is a self-closing image tag, and we can remove this about section text. Now, if we save that and reload the page, you can see this great arrow appears, and if you look really closely, you can see that it animates up. Great. That's going to be it for our About section. But now, can we really scroll from here to there? It looks like we can. Let's expand it to the full window. There we go. Metaverse Madness. Let's reload the page once. And let's click this button. And it doesn't appear to scroll down, which is not good. We can look into that later on once we focus on other scrolls on the website. Now we can close the About and the custom texts, and we can look into our page structure. There was one workaround that I had to do to make the gradients work. You're going to notice that across this page, we have a lot of different gradients. One at the top left, then we have one right here. We also have one right here. So to be able to add all of those gradients that make our page look great, we have to separate our layout by using some divs. So below the hero, we're going to add a div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to relative. Inside of there, we can put the About and the Explore sections, like this. And between them, we're going to add a div, a self-closing div, with a class name equal to gradient-03. And the z index is going to be 0. Now, if we save this and go back, you can see that the gradient changes a bit, but we cannot yet see all the difference. Finally, we're going to repeat this process for a few other sections as well to be able to add all the gradients. We're going to copy this div, wrap the get started and what's new with that div as well. And in between those, we can duplicate this div for the gradient, but this time it's going to be gradient-04. And we can repeat this process one more time for the insights and the feedback. Right here, we started before the insights, we ended after the feedback, and then we add a gradient in between them. That's going to be gradient-04, the same one that we had above. Now, we cannot yet see all the gradients because these sections are so close together, but once we start implementing the sections and giving them height, we'll start seeing all of those gradients that are on the page. Great. With that said, we can dive into our next section, which is the Explore. And the Explore, in my opinion, is going to be the most interesting of them all, because we're going to dive into this interesting layout. We'll be able to hover over these different images, and they're going to expand to show us the worlds which we can go into using a VR headset. We're going to play with animations, animate these staggered, meaning they're going to animate one by one and do a lot of cool stuff. So let's collapse this and let's dive into the Explore section right away. To get started with our Explore page, we can again copy some of the imports from previous pages. So let's copy them from the About and let's paste them right here in the Explore. We'll need to import motion from Framer Motion, but we're going to also import for the first time in this app, use state coming from React. Alongside the typing text component, we're going to also need a couple of other components. That's going to be Explore card as well as title text, and that's coming from / components. We're also importing styles, and then from utils, we only need the stagger container property. Finally, we also need the data for these worlds right here, the names and images. So we can import right here at the bottom, explore worlds, and that's coming from / constants. Remember when I told you I prepared some content from the design? Well, it's just this. It's a series of objects having IDs, image URLs, and titles corresponding to these different images right here. Great. So let's start by coding this part. We can go back to Explore, and now that we have all the imports, we can first style our section. We can give it a class name, make it into a template string, and say styles.paddings. Also, give it an ID of Explore. Now, this is going to allow us to scroll by using this button. So if we click, it scrolls nicely. Perfect. Now, we can also create a motion div inside of it, so motion.div, and we want to give it some variants. In this case, variants are going to be stagger container because we're going to have many more animations within it. Initially, we want to have it as hidden. Then, while in view, we want to set it to show. Again, for the viewport, we're going to do the same thing. That's going to be once is set to false. And also, amount is 0.25. Finally, the class name is going to be a template string of styles.innerWidth, mxAuto, and finally flex and flex column. Great. Inside of there, we can render this small heading, the world. So let's do just that by rendering the typing text component. That's the component we have already developed right here. So the only thing we have to do is simply pass the title, which is going to be one straight line, the world, and then also the text styles, which is going to be equal to simply a string of text-center. Now, if we save this, you can see that once we scroll down, we have the world, and you can see how it nicely animates in. Then below that, we can also render the title text. This is going to be a self-closing component, and we also are going to pass in the title, which is this time going to be an empty React fragment that has the choose the world you want inside of it. We can see that from the design. Choose the world you want, but then we want to have a break tag and then to explore. So we can simply render a BR tag right here after the want. That BR tag is going to have a class name equal to MD block, meaning visible on medium devices, but hidden usually. Great. And then finally, we can say to explore after the break tag. Now, we cannot see anything yet because we haven't yet developed the title text component. So let's simply pass the text styles equal to text dash center. And now we are ready to dive into the title text component and develop it. The title text is nothing more than a motion.h2. So it's animated title, and it's going to have a variance equal to text variant 2. Initially, it's going to be set to hidden, while in view is going to be set to show, and then finally the class name is going to be a template string where we give it a margin top to divide it from the text above of 8 pixels. We give it a font dash bold. It is a title after all. On medium devices, the text is going to be 64 pixels, and then usually the text is going to be a bit smaller of 40 pixels. The color is going to be white, and we also want to pass all of the text styles that we send through the props right here. Inside of there, we're going to render the title. Now, if we save it, we can see choose the world you want to explore. This is looking great. Let's expand it just a bit. There we go. And now if we reload the page and click this sticker right here, it's going to point us to the choose the world you want to explore. Great. Now we are ready to add these cool images and make them clickable. So below the title text, we can create a div. That div is going to have a class name equal to empty 50 pixels to divide it a bit from the top. It's going to be flex. On large devices, we want to make it into a flex row and usually flex column. We want to give it a minimum height, so min-h- of 70 vh, 70 view height, and then we want to give it a gap of 5. Inside of there, we want to map over our explore worlds. So explore worlds.map, we get each individual world and the index of that world. And we want to instantly return a new component. That's going to be a component we haven't yet created, the explore card self-closing component. To each one, we want to pass the key equal to the world.id. We then want to spread all of the props of the world. So that's going to be .world right here. We also want to pass it an index, an active property, which is going to come from the state, which we haven't yet created, and then the handle click property, which is going to set the active state. So now, as you can see, everything is right besides the active and set active. So we can add those to the state above. Right here, my ESLint transformed this into an instantly return function, but we want to have a regular return right here. So let me just quickly fix that. And then we can add a use state here. So I'm going to say use state snippet, active, set active, and that's going to be world-2. As you can see on the design, the second world is expanded initially. And now if we go down, we can see our worlds, or rather, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 explore cards. Now we can dive into the explore card component and develop it from scratch. This one, as you can imagine, is going to be a bit tougher because we're messing with a lot of different animations and we're expanding the actual cards on click. So this is an interesting part, and let's dive right in. To develop our explore card, we can again go back to pages and to our Navbar, because from here we can copy all of the imports to save us some time. Going back to our explore card, we can paste them, and as you can see, we're importing motion from Framer Motion, we're importing the styles, and also we're gonna import the fade in motion. With that said, we already know that our explore card is accepting some props. It's going to accept the key, the index, active value, handle click, but also all of the properties that the world has. So these properties are going to be ID, image URL, and title. So we can go back to explore card and we can get those props right here. That's going to be ID, img URL, title, index, active, and handle click. Now we're going to wrap this in a motion.div and we're going to give it some variance. So we can say variance is equal to, and we're going to call in the fade in variant. We want to fade in from right. It's going to be a spring type animation, and we want to animate these one by one. So if we put a static animation or static delay, then they're going to all animate at the same time. But if we take the index and then multiply it by 0.5 seconds, then the first one is going to happen in 0.5 seconds, the second one in 1 second, the third one in 1.5 seconds, and so on. So they're going to show one by one. And we can also add the duration of 1.75. Great. Now we need to add a class name. So let's say class name is equal to, it's going to be a template string, it's going to be relative, but now we need to check whether it is active. So we can add a dynamic template string and say if active is equal to the current ID, then we're going to give it LG property, flex is 3.5. Meaning it's going to take 3.5 times as much as it is when it's not opened. We also want to give it a flex of 10. If it's not active, then on large devices, we simply want to give it a flex of 0.5 and a flex dash 2 usually. Great. Now we can keep adding additional properties. So we can go right here outside of this variable. And that's going to be flex, items dash center, justify dash center, min dash w dash 170 pixels for the width, h dash 700 pixels for the height, transition dash flex like this, duration dash 0.7 seconds, ease out flex, and cursor dash pointer. Now if we save this and reload the page, we can see that they slowly animate in, but it's hard to see because it's just dark text. So let's implement the inside of the card by adding an image. Right here, we can create a self-closing image tag that's going to have a source equal to img URL, which we're getting from props. It's going to be different for every image. Let's give it an alt tag equal to title, and let's also give it a class name equal to absolute, w-full, h-full, object-cover, and rounded-24 pixels. Now, if we save this, you can see those images appear right there. And now check this out. If we reload the page, you can notice how they slowly animate in one after the other. Of course, now we don't yet know which one is active, so we have to make that work. So what we can do is below the image, we can check if active is not triple equal to ID. In that case, we can render the following. We're going to render an h3, and this h3 is going to contain a title. So now if we save this, we cannot see it yet because we have to add some classes. So let's add a class name equal to font-semi-bold. On small devices, text-26 pixels, text-18 pixels usually, text-white, absolute, z-0, LG bottom-20 to position it from the bottom, LG rotate -90 degrees, and LG origin -0, 0. Now, if we save this, you can see the text appear on the bottom. It is positioned like this. We had to rotate it. But this is only for the ones that are currently not active. And as you can see, the second one has been selected as the active one. So we have to make that work as well. So that's going to be the second part of our clause right here. So instead of and, we can put the question mark to open up a ternary expression and then have the second part right here. In this case, we're going to render a div. That div is going to have one more div inside of it. And then inside of that div, we can render an image. This image is going to have a source equal to, that's going to be /headset.svg. It's going to have an alt tag equal to headset, and it's going to have a class name equal to w-1/2, h-1/2, and object-contain. Now, if we save this, you should be able to see that headset, but we cannot see it yet because it's behind the image. We have to add these styles for these divs above. So let's do that first. We're going to give this above div a class name equal to absolute bottom-0 p-8. And as soon as we do that, you can notice the headset appear right here, but it's too small. So let's continue adding class names. Let's also give it justify-start, w-full, flex-call, and bg-rgba 000, which is complete black, and then 0.5. Finally, we need to close it, and we can say rounded-b-24 pixels to round it up. Now, if we save this, you can notice it gets much bigger and we get this background right here, which makes things much more visible, because as you can see, the text right here is not that visible because we don't have that line. Finally, we can style the inner div by giving it a class name equal to a template string of styles.flexCenter. We can also give it a w-60 pixel, h-60 pixel for the height, rounded-24 pixels, glass morphism, margin bottom 16 pixels. If we save this, now we have this nice rounded circle around our icon. Finally, let's add some text. Below this div containing an image, we're going to add a p tag. This p tag is going to say enter the metaverse. And of course, we have to style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to font-normal, text-16 pixels, leading-20 pixels, text-white, and uppercase. There we go, enter the metaverse, but we also need a title, the name of that playground. We can see it for these ones, but we cannot see it for the second one. So let's add an h2. That h2 is going to render the title. And we can give it a class name equal to mt-24 pixels to divide it a bit from the rest. Font-semi-bold. On small devices, text is going to be 32 pixels large. Usually, it's going to be 24 pixels large. And it's going to be text-white. Now, if we save this, the second one is currently clicked and the other ones are not. Now, if you expand it, you're also going to notice that this one takes more space. This is due to the flex properties that we used. This one takes 3.5 much space as the other ones. So this is great, but of course we cannot yet click them because we didn't implement the functionality. So we can collapse this one more time and you can see that it also nicely scales on mobile devices. Finally, on our initial div, we can add an onClick property. That's going to be just below the class name. The only thing we have to do is say onClick, call the callback function, and call the handle click and pass in the ID of the area you want to select. So now if you click right here, you can see that it changes. This is looking great. So now if we expand it into its full glory, scroll to the top and reload the page, we can notice this great animation coming in, and slowly as we move down, things animate as well. So we have our text right there, and then check this out. They animate as you scroll. Maybe I scrolled a bit too slowly, but you get the point. If we now reload the page here, you can see how they slowly animate in. And you can also choose which one do you want to select, and then it expands. Isn't this great? This is my favorite part of the application. Great. With that said, we are done with the Explore card component. And with that, we're also done with the Explore section. So we can go back to page and we can open up the next one, which is the Get Started section. Let's quickly check the design to see what do we have to implement. And let's expand it. As you can see, this is just how to get started with the app. We're going to have this huge illustration on the left side and then some title and a few steps on the right side. With that said, let's collapse this and let's get started. To get started with the Get Started page, we can go back to Pages and then to Explore. There we can take a couple of imports and then utilize them on the Get Started page as well. In this case, we won't be needing the use state, but we will need motion, we will need styles, we will need stagger container, as well as fade in, and finally planet variance. And regarding components, we're gonna need the start steps, title text, and typing text. And finally, from constants, we're gonna get the starting features. Great. With that said, we can add a class name to our section. That's going to be a template string of styles.paddings, as well as relative and z index of 10. Inside of that section, we're going to have a div. That div is going to be a motion div. So we can say motion.div, and you know what we need? We need a variance. This div is going to be a container, so we can give it a stagger container variant. Initially, it's going to be set to hidden. Usually, or rather while in view, it's going to be set to show. Viewport is going to be set to once, false, and also amount 0.25. Finally, the class name is going to be a template string of styles.innerWidth, mx-auto for margin, flex on large devices, flex-row, usually flex-col, and we're going to have a gap of 8. Inside of there, we're going to have one more motion div. So let's create it, motion.div. To that div, we're going to give a variance equal to, and that's going to be planet variance. So like this, planet variance, but we call it as a function and provide the left. So now if you go into it, you can notice that we have direction. Do we want to go left or do we want to go right? So if we look at the final design, in here, we want to scroll this from the left. But for the next section, we're going to scroll it from the right. Hopefully that makes sense. We can also give it a class name equal to template string of flex-1 and styles.flexCenter. Finally, inside of there, we can render the image. That's going to be a self-closing image tag with a source /get-started.png. Also, alt is going to be get started. And the class name is going to be w-90%, h-90%, and finally object-contain. Now, if we save this and scroll down, you can see how nicely this planet flew in. Let's see that one more time by reloading the page. Oh, we missed it. There we go. We saw it there at the bottom. Perfect. And now let's add the text. So below this motion div containing the image, we're going to have one more motion div, but this time for the text. So let's give it a variance equal to a string, a function call of fade in from left of a type tween, 0.2 seconds delay, and then 1 second duration. We can also give it a class name equal to flex-0.75, meaning it's going to take 0.75% of the space of the entire width of the screen. Image is going to take a bit more. Flex, justify-center, and flex-call. Inside of there, we can render the components we have used so far. That's going to be the typing text. We can give it a title equal to how metaverses works. There we go. And we can self-close that. We can then create a title text, another self-closing component we have used before. And we can also give it a title that's going to have a component inside of there. That's going to be a React fragment saying get started with just a few clicks. If we save that and reload the page, we can see the text right here. Finally, below that, we can render one more div. That div is going to have a class name of mt-31 pixel to divide it a bit from the top. flex, flex-call, max-w-370 pixels for the width, gap-24 pixels for the spacing. And inside of there, we can map over our starting features. So we can say starting features dot map. We get each individual feature and the index of that feature. And for each one, we want to instantly return the start steps component. To that start steps component, we're going to pass in the key equal to feature. Below the key, we're going to have a number, and number is going to be index plus 1. And finally, the text is also going to be a feature. Now, you can see that we have 3 start steps, and those starting features look like this. Find a world that suits you and you want to enter. And these are mainly taken from the design, as you can see right here. 1, 2, 3, enter the world, no need to beat. So these are the starting steps. Now we can go into the starting steps component and we can code it out. We're going to have a div and we accept some props. We accept a number as well as a text that we just passed. We also need to import the styles coming from /styles. Let's give it a class name equal to a template string of styles.flexCenter and flex-row. We're going to have one more div inside of it. This div is going to have a class name equal to, that's going to be a template string of styles.flexCenter one more time, but also w-70 pixels for the width, h-70 pixels for the height, rounded-24 pixels, and bg-323f5d. That's that grayish color. Finally, inside of there, we can render a p tag, and there we can put the number. Now, if we save this, you can see 1, 2, 3, but let's color those numbers out. That's going to be a class name equal to font-bold, text-20 pixels, and text-white. If we save that, this is looking better, but on the design, we have 0, 1, 0, 2, and 0, 3. In this case, we can just add that 0 before the number. There we go. Finally, let's render the text as well. That's going to be below this div, another p tag, where we can render the text. And it's going to have a class name equal to flex-1, margin left or ml-30 pixels, font-normal, text-18 pixels, and text-b0, b0, which is a special color, and leading-32 pixels. If we save that, we can see our text appear right here. And you can see on tablets, we have the planet and then the text right there. But let's now expand this to check it out in its full glory. There we go. This is looking much better. We have our sections, and then we have get started with just a few clicks. This is great. Now let's collapse it right here. And let's close the start steps as well as the get started because we're done with that section. The next section on our list is going to be what's new. And these sections are quite similar. As you can see right here, get started has the planet on the left, while the what's new has the planet on the right. So to code it, again, let's simply get the imports from the get started, copy them, and then paste them in the what's new file. We will need motion from Framer Motion, styles. Instead of starting features, we're going to need new features. Then we're going to need a new features component, title text and typing text. And finally, we're going to need planet variance, fade in, and stagger container. So this is great. Now the div and the section wrapping this part is also the same as in the get started. So we can simply copy this section and the entire motion div. As a matter of fact, we can copy the entire get started part, but we're going to do a couple of small adjustments. So simply copy everything from start of the section to the end of the section of the get started page and paste it into what's new. Immediately, we can comment out these starting features because we no longer have them. We now only have the new features. So comment this div out. And let's start from the top. Inside of here, the planet should be on the right side. And we have our motion div with the image right here at the start. So simply copy it or cut it and put it below this motion div right here. First, we have the text, and then we have this. We have the image. So now if we save that and go back, you can see that something looks quite a bit off, but no worries there. That's because we're going to change this to planet variance to right, because we want the planet to appear from the right. And it's not going to be get started.png, it's going to be what's dash new.png. Now, if you reload the page, you can see the planet jumps from the right, and on the left we have the text. But of course, we have to change that text just a bit right now. So in this motion div, we're going to fade in from the right. The typing text is going to say what's new. And in here, we can say what's new about metaverses. There we go. So that changed. And finally, for this div, as we said, we no longer have the starting features, but now we have the new features that we want to map over. But for that, we're going to use a new features component, not the one we used before. So in this case, we simply need to pass a key equal to feature.title. And then instead of passing the number in the text, we can simply spread out the entire feature like this. We don't even need the index in this case. For the styling, wrapping that new component, we're going to use empty, that's going to be 48 pixels. Flex, we're going to also use flex-wrap. We won't need the flex call and max-w, so we can remove that. But we will need justify-between. Great. Now, if we save this, you can see two new features, which took the layout of how it should be. 1, 2. So now we can go into the new features component and we can implement it. We can first import the styles from the top by saying import styles from /styles. We can also get from the props the image URL, the title, and the subtitle. There, we can give this div a class name of flex-1, flex-column. On small devices, max-w-250 pixels, and min-w-210 pixels. If we save this, it's just going to change the layout a bit. But now we want to have one more inner div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to, it's going to be a template string of styles.flexCenter, w-70 pixels, h-70 pixels, rounded-24 pixels, bg-323f5d, a similar grayish color. And finally, we can render an image inside of there. That image is going to have a source equal to img URL, the alt tag equal to icon, and also the class name equal to w-1/2, h-1/2, and object-contain. If we save this, we can see those two beautiful icons. And below that, we can render an h1. That h1 is going to say title, and then we can render the title right here. And below that, we can render a p tag that's going to render the subtitle like this. So if we save this, we can see a lot of text right now, but of course we have to style it. So the h1 is going to have the margin top of 26 pixels to divide it from the top. It's going to have a font-bold, as well as text-24 for the size of the text. It's also going to have a leading -30 pixel property. Finally, the text is going to be white. Okay, this is already a bit better. And finally, let's change the p tag to give it a class name equal to flex-1, margin top 16 pixels to divide it from the top, font-normal, text dash 18 pixels, text dash hash b0 b0 b0, and leading dash 32 pixels. Now, if we save this, it's still not going to look good, and that's because this div was only supposed to wrap this image and not the h2 and the p tag as well. So let's close this div properly right here after the image. If we do that, this is looking better, but still not looking good. In here, I was supposed to put the hash instead of a $sign, so let's fix that. That's better, but still, these should appear one next to another. So if we grow this a bit more, there we go. This is looking so much better. And notice how everything is centered around the center of the page. The beginner mistake that designers and developers make is they extend the content all the way to the edges of the screen, but that is not needed. It's much easier to read and see what's happening if you leave some padding on the right side. So now we can see all the great animations, and this is looking great. Perfect. With that said, believe it or not, the new features section is also done. So now we can expand this and we can close the new features and what's new, and we can dive into the world. The world section is going to look like this. We're going to have a title, track friends around you, and invite them to play together in the same world. And then we have this great illustration. So let's focus on that right away. To start with the world section, let's again use some imports from the last page we have implemented, which is the what's new. We can copy these imports and then paste them right inside of top of the world. So we're going to need the motion, we're going to need styles, we will need title text and typing text from components, and we're going to need the stagger container and the fade in. We won't need planet variants right here, and we don't need anything from the constants. Great. Now, the initial section and the motion div are also the same as from the last section, so we can dive into what's new, and we can just copy the starting section and the starting motion div. So right here in the world, we can just paste the section and the motion div, and then we can add the closing tag as well. Inside of here, we want to immediately show the typing text people on the world. So we can copy that, create a typing text component. It's a self-closing one. Give it a title equal to people on the world, whatever that means. And then we can also give it the styles, text styles, equal to text-center. If we save that and go back, we can see people on the world. We can also add a title text below. That is also a self-closing component. It's going to have a title property, but this time it's going to be a component that's going to render a React fragment. And then inside of there, we can copy the text from here. That's going to be track friends around. So simply right click and then click copy. There we go. We can also give it a text styles property equal to text-center. Now, if we save this and go back, we can see that this is centered, but this right here isn't. So looking at this, we have the section, paddings, relative Z10, stagger container, MX auto, we have flex, and in this case, we don't need flex row on large devices. We can always leave it to column, and we can also delete the gap-8. Once we save this, you can see people on the world shows up on top. Great. Now we can continue below the title text, and there we can create another motion div. So motion.div, let's also give it a variant. Variant is going to be a function of fade in, to which we're going to pass in the fade in up, tween, 0.3, and then 1. And also we're going to give it a class name equal to relative, mt-68 pixels, flex, w-full, and h-550 pixels. In between that div, we want to render that huge map. So we can say img We can give it a source equal to / map.png. Also, alt is going to be map. And we can give it a class name equal to w-full, h-full, and object-cover. If we save this, a huge map appears. But as you can see, we're going to do something interesting. We're going to show these elements and make them appear on top of the map. So let's do that right away. Below this image, we're going to have a div, and that div is going to be positioned absolutely. So we can say class name, position absolute, bottom 20, right 20, w-70 pixels, h-70 pixels, p-6 pixels for the padding, rounded-full, and bg-hash 5d6680, like this. Now, inside of there, we have to add an image. So that's going to be a self-closing image tag with a source equal to people-01.png. Alt tag is also going to say people, like this. And finally, the class name is going to be w-full and h-full. If we save this, we can see our person appear on the bottom right. We have a little Australian dude. Now we can essentially copy this entire div with the image inside of it, and we can paste it 2 more times, 1 and then 2. Let's see what do we have to change to make these different. First of all, it's going to be absolute, but this time it's going to be top-10 and also left-20. Width, height, and P are going to remain the same, rounded is the same, and background color is the same. But it's going to be people02. So if we save this, now we get a second person. Finally, we want to add one more person. This one is going to be top 1/2 and then left 45%. Everything else can remain the same, but it's going to be people03. Let's save it. And there we go. We have our third person as well. If you want to, you can add those cards as well. That would definitely be a nice addition. I purposely left this for you as an extra front-end challenge so that you don't simply copy everything I'm doing. Go to the design, get these assets, export them right here, and then try figuring out how you can also display them on the map. With that said, if we now go back, you can see that our map is fully completed. If we expand it, it also nicely scales, and there we go. Perfect. Let's collapse it back there, close the world, and jump into the Insights section. This section looks like this. It is essentially a blog post section where we have links to these different articles, insights about the metaverse. To start developing our Insights section, we can again copy the imports from What's New. So let's get in there, copy all the imports, and make our life easy by simply pasting them right here. We're going to need motion, styles, stagger container. We won't need fade in and planet variants though. We will need a new component called inside card, title text, typing text, and then from constants, we're going to need to get insights. There we go. And again, the initial div is going to be the same as in the previous section, as in the world section. So we can simply copy the section and the start of the motion div, and we can paste it right here. Of course, we have to close the motion div as well. And then inside of there, we can render the typing text. We can give it a title equal to, let's go back to the design. Let's copy the title, which is going to be insight. Let's give it a text styles prop equal to text-center. And let's also create a title text component. Give it a title equal to, that's going to be insight about metaverse. And let's also give it a text styles of text-center. You can see how we made everything reusable, which is great. Now, if we go back, we can see our insight about Metaverse, but we cannot see our typing text for some reason. Let's reload the page. Scroll all the way down, and there we go. We can see it, but we have to add that vertical line. Now, below that, we're going to have a div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to empty-50 pixels, so divided from the top. flex-call, and gap-30 pixels. Inside of there, we want to map over our insights. So we can say insights.map. We get each individual insight. We also get the index of that insight, and then we can render something out. And that something is going to be the insight card self-closing component. To it, we can pass a key that's going to be equal to a template string of insight dash, and then we can render the index. And we can also spread the entire insight. Finally, we want to pass the index that's going to be equal to index plus 1. Great. Now we can dive into the insight card, and that's going to be this card right here. It contains the image on the left side, the title, description, and then this button right here. So to develop this insight card, we can import motion coming from Framer motion, and we can import fade in coming from /utils/motion. This insight card accepts the IMG URL, the title, the subtitle, and the index. Based on this, we can create a motion.div that's going to have a variant equal to fade in. It's going to be up type of spring, and then we're going to add index times 0.5 and then duration 1. Again, we are animating them one by one to make them appear like they're loading up. We can also give it a class name equal to flex, md flex-row, meaning on medium devices, like this, usually flex-column, and gap-4. Inside of there, we want to render first the planet card. So let's render the self-closing image. Source is going to be equal to IMG URL. Alt is going to be planet 01. And class name is going to be on medium devices. Width is 270 pixels, not 300, but rather 200. W-full usually. H is 250 pixels for the height, rounded -32 pixels, and object-cover. Now, if we save this and go back, we can see 3 great planet images. And if we reload the page, it kept scrolling down, so we couldn't really see it, but they load one by one. If you were initially scrolling to it, you would be able to see the animation. We're going to fix this really soon. Below this image, we're going to have a div. And that div is going to have a class name equal to W-full, flex, justify-between, and items-center. Inside of that div, we're going to have one more div that's going to have a class name equal to flex-1, on medium devices, margin left 62 pixels, flex, flex-call, and then max-w-650 pixels. This is going to be for the inner div containing the title and the description. Finally, we can render that title by adding the h4 right here and putting the title inside of it. And below that, we can render a p tag that's going to render the subtitle. Of course, we can barely see them now, so let's give them some styles, such as class name equal to font-normal, LG text-huge 42 pixels, but usually text-26 pixels, and text-secondary-white. This is already much better. No, for title, it should have been just text-white because this is our title. And then for the p tag, we can give it a class name equal to margin top 16 pixels to divide it from the top, font dash normal. On large devices, text is going to be 20 pixels. Usually, text is going to be 14 pixels. And text is going to be secondary white. If we save this, now this is looking much closer to what do we have on the design. Finally, we have to add this button on the right side. So that's going to be below this div. We can create one more div. This div is going to contain that image with a source equal to arrow.svg. Alt is going to be arrow, and then class name can be w-40%, h-40%, and finally object-contain. If we save this, we can see that little arrow there, but we cannot see the circle around it. So let's create it. To this div, we can give a class name equal to, on large devices, flex, usually hidden. Items-center, justify-center, width is going to be 100 pixels. Height is going to be 100 pixels as well. Rounded is going to be full. BG-transparent. Border is going to be 1 pixel. And border is going to be white. If we save this, we can see this huge button appear. And that's going to be it for our insight card. And with that, also our entire insights. So now if we expand this, this is looking great. Insights about Metaverse. And you can see it matches the design completely. Perfect. The next section on our list is going to be this great section. That's the feedback section. You can put some reviews here, but also we have a word from the founder of Metaverses. So let's go back and collapse this. Notice how it nicely scales to tablet devices. And we can go into the feedback section. To start developing our feedback section, let's first import motion coming from framer-motion. Let's also import styles coming from /styles. And finally, we can import fade in, stagger container, as well as zoom in for the first time ever from /utils/motion. In here, we again have that same section that we used the last couple of times. So we can go back to our insights section, and we can copy the section as well as the first motion div that's wrapping it. So inside of the feedback, we can simply replace the opening section with the section and the motion div. Now we can close this div properly, and let's look at the class names. We have MX Auto, Flex, but in this case, we're going to also add on large devices, flex-row, usually flex-col, and then finally, we're going to add a gap of 6. Inside of there, we're going to create another motion div. So right here, motion.div. This motion div is going to have, of course, variance equal to fade in, and that's going to be fade in from the right, tween, and 0.2 second is going to be delay, and then 1 second is going to be duration. Of course, we have to give it a class name as well. Just to remind you, we're building this part right here. Let's give it some class names. For example, flex-0.5. This is going to make it take 50% of the screen. On large devices, max-w-370 pixels for width. Flex, justify-end, flex-col, and gradient-05. On small devices, the padding is going to be 8. Usually, padding is going to be 4. It's going to be rounded-32 pixels. It's going to have a border of 1px, and it's going to be border dash, and then the color is going to be hash 6a, 6a, 6a. And let's make it relative. Now inside of there, we can put a feedback gradient div. That's a self-closing div that's going to have a class name equal to feedback-gradient. Now if we save this, right here, we can see this great looking card, and it's getting close to this div right here. Of course, we're missing some content. So let's add Samantha, and let's add the founder of Metaverses. So right below this div, we can add another div, inside of which we're going to have an h4. Inside of there, we can say Samantha. Below that, we can have a p tag, and then inside of there, we can say founder of Metaverses. Of course, we won't be able to see those yet. We have to add some class names. So for the h4, we can add a font-bold. On small devices, text is going to be 32 pixels. Usually, text is going to be 26 pixels. On small devices, leading is going to be set to 40 pixels. And usually, leading is going to be set to 36 pixels. That is taken from the design. And the text is going to be white. Now, if we save this, we can see this huge Samantha text. Let's also style our founder here. Class name is equal to margin top of 8 pixels, font-normal. On small devices, text-18 pixels. Usually, text is 12 pixels. On small devices, leading is 22 pixels. And usually, leading is 16 pixels. Finally, text-white. If we save this, we can now see this text right here. But of course, we are yet to add this long description. So let's go ahead and copy it from here. And below this div, we're going to add another p tag. Inside of there, we can paste what we copied. Let's also apply some class names. As a matter of fact, we can copy the class names from the top p tag and paste them right here. Now, if we go back, it's going to look almost good, but let's change the margin top to 24 pixels to divide it a bit. Let's also change the small text to 24 to make it a bit bigger, usually 18. Leading is going to be 45 pixels and usually 39. If we save this, it's going to look a bit better. Now, of course, we have to add the right side of this section. So we can go outside of this motion div right here. And inside of there, we can create another motion.div. This motion div is going to have variance is equal to fade in from the left of type tween, 0.2 seconds delay, 1 second duration. Class name is relative, flex-1, flex, justify-center, and items-center to fully center it. We're working on this planet image. Finally, inside of there, we can render the image. That's going to be a self-closing image tag that's going to have a source equal to /planet-09.png. And we can also add the alt tag of planet09. Class name is going to be w-full, and we can save it to check it out. Of course, we first have to reload the page since we're working with animations, and scroll all the way down. There we go. We can see our full-size image. But let's also, on large devices, give it a height of 610 pixels. We cannot see the change yet because we're on the smaller device now. Usually H-auto, min-H-210 pixels, and then object-cover. Finally, rounded-40 pixels. If we save that, we're going to get those great corners. Now we can expand this a bit more to see it side by side. There we go. This is much better. And finally, we have to add that stamp in between. So to do that, we can add one more motion div below this image. Motion.div. This one is going to have a variant, or rather variance, of zoom in 0.4 and then 1. Let's give it a class name equal to, on large devices, it's going to be block, meaning visible. Usually, it's going to be hidden. We also have to position it absolutely, so we can position it on top of the image and on top of the review. It's going to be positioned on minus left, minus, and then 10%. And on top dash 3%. Now, if we save this, we cannot see it because we haven't yet put the image inside of the div. So if we add the image tag and give it a source equal to /stamp.png and save it, reload the page, and there we go. There's our huge stamp. So what we can do is we can give it an alt tag of stamp, and then also we can give it a class name equal to w-155 pixels and h-155 pixels. Finally, object-contain. If we now save this, it's going to look much, much better. So now if we clear our URL, reload the page, and slow down, we can see all of these animations happening. This is looking great. There we go. And we have our final animation that we just saw. This is looking great. And with that, we're done with the feedback section. It looks great on tablet devices as well as on desktops. Now we can collapse this one more time. And we can go to our final section of the page, which is our footer. Let's see how our footer is going to look like. If I expand this right here, we can see that the footer contains this call to action button with the text and also line, and then finally a regular simple footer. So what we can do is collapse this. And as always, we can import a couple of things. We can import motion coming from framer-motion. We can also import socials coming from /constants. We can also import styles coming from /styles. And finally, we can import footer variants coming from /utils/motion. Finally, our footer is going to be a motion.footer because we want to animate it, and we're going to have some variants. Our variants are going to be footer variants. We're going to give it the initial of hidden, and while in view, we want it to show. Finally, we want to give it a class name equal to a template string of styles.paddings to add left and right padding, and padding y 8 on top and bottom, as well as relative. Inside of this motion footer, we can have a self-closing div that's going to have a class name equal to footer-gradient. Of course, let's properly close it, and then let's check it out. If I save this, you can see this gradient at the bottom right now. Now below that, we can add the wrapper for the actual footer. That's going to be a div that's going to have a class name equal to a template string of styles.innerWidth. It's going to have a margin X of auto, flex, flex-call, and gap-8. Inside of that div, we can have one more div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to flex, items-center, justify-between, flex-wrap, and gap-5. This is the container for this div right here, containing the call to action button. Inside of there, we can have an h4. For the inside of h4, we can copy this text element right here, and we can give it a class name. Inside of there, we can say font-bold. On medium devices, text is going to be 64 pixels, and usually text is going to be 44 pixels. And of course, text-white. Now we can see that huge enter the metaverse text. Of course, below that, we have to add a button. So right below the h4, we can add a button element. This button is going to be of a type is equal to button, and it's going to have a class name equal to flex, items-center, h-fit, padding y 4, padding x 6, bg-hash25618b, and it's going to be rounded dash 32 pixels, and finally it's going to have a gap of 12 pixels. There we go. Now inside of that button, we're going to have an image. This is going to be a self-closing image tag. If we save this, we can see this outline of a button, but now if we add a source equal to /headset.svg, we can see that headset right here, or I should have properly spelled that, so that's going to be headset, and there we go. This is already looking better. We can give it an alt tag as well of headset, and we can give it a class name equal to w-24 pixels for the width, h-24 pixels for the height, and object-contain. There we go. This is looking great. And finally, below that image, we need a span element that's going to have a class name equal to font-normal, text-16 pixels, and text-white. That's going to say, let's see it right here, enter metaverse. So let's copy that and let's go back and save it. There we go. This is looking great. Now we have to exit that button and exit this div right here, and we're going to create another div. Now keep in mind, this is one line, but now we're focusing on what's below this line right here. So if I expand this a bit, you can see that the button is on the right side, this is on the left side, and now we can focus on what is below. To do that, we can wrap everything in a div that has a class name equal to flex and flex-call. Inside of there, we can render that line. That's going to be a self-closing div that's going to have a class name equal to margin bottom 50 pixels, h-2 pixels, bg-white, and opacity-10. If we fix this and save it, you can see this line appear right there. Now below that, we can focus on the last part, which is the actual footer. Below this line, we can create one more div that's going to serve as our footer. It's going to have a class name equal to flex, items-center, justify-between, flex-wrap, and gap-4. Inside of there, we can render this text, metaverses, copyright, and the icons. So to do that, let's first add an h4. There we go. Inside of there, we can say metaverses. And let's give it a class name equal to font-extra bold, text-24 pixels, and text-white. Below that, we can have a p tag that's going to have a class name equal to font-normal, text-14 pixels, and text-white, as well as opacity-50. There we can copy this text for the copyright. Let's go into it and paste it inside. If we save this, this is already looking better, but we can also add those social icons. So below the p tag, we can add a div, give it a class name equal to flex and gap-4, and finally we can loop over our social icons by calling socials.map. We get each individual social, and we can return an image for each one. The key is going to be social.name, source is going to be social.url, alt is going to be social.name, and finally the class name is going to be w-24 pixels for the width, h-24 pixels for the height, object-contain, and cursor-pointer. If we save this, the icons appear. If you're wondering where did we get these icons from, you can go into the socials, and right here we have a URL and the name for each one of them. Great. With that said, our footer is done. And with the footer, we've actually came to the end of our entire page. Let's expand it And let's celebrate it in its full glory. One more time, I'm going to scroll to the top, reload the page, and let's scroll through it one more time to admire its full glory. We can see those animations animate as we scroll. We can see those images and planets popping up. We can select different ones to expand them, and they slowly animate in. The planets are also flowing in, and then the text is also animating right here. Let's see that planet. There we go, it's flew in really nicely. The text is appearing. We can see this huge map right there with our people from all around the world. And finally, we have the insights about the metaverse. Let's call these blog posts. Then, if I'm not mistaken, we have references. So right here, we have a word from the founder. And finally, the footer is going to nicely animate in. And this is the end of our entire build. It is phenomenal. It is a really beautiful application. And we can even check the mobile version. So if we go to inspect, choose something like iPhone 12 Pro, and scroll down, you can see that everything is nicely animating. Even these images, they show on top of each other. We get the text, we get planets, everything is looking perfect. This is a beautiful website that many companies would love to have as their company page, especially the more modern Web3 related ones. With that said, there's one more step left to do, and that is, of course, deployment. To deploy our great project to the internet, you can go to View and then Terminal. Then you can press Ctrl+C and then Y to stop it from running, and you can run the clear command. Finally, since we're using Next.13, there's a couple of things we'll have to do before exporting our code. Static export of our page is still not available from the app directory. So we'll just have to move a couple of things from the app to the old and trusted pages folder. First of all, let's delete the API folder inside of pages. And inside of there, we can create a new underscore app.js file. Down in the description of this video, you can find a GitHub gist containing the code for the underscore app.js file. You can copy it and then paste it right here. Essentially, it is all that we already had in the head part of our application. Great. Now that we have the underscore app.js, we also have to have the index.js. So let's create the index.js inside of pages. And for here, let's go back to page.js and copy the entire page. Finally, paste it right here in the index. Now that we implemented the underscore app and the index, we can also go to the next.config and we can switch app directory to false. Finally, inside of the package.json, we can add an additional command to the build script. So we can say next build and next export. This is going to export these static files. Finally, we can close all of our currently opened files. We can go back to View and then Terminal, and we can run the command we just created, npm run build. This command is going to create an optimized production build of our application so we can deploy it to the internet. While the build is being created, you can open up Hostinger's dashboard by going to hpanel.hostinger.com. Inside of here, you can see your premium shared hosting that you purchased at the start of the video. So go ahead and click Manage. Inside of here, you can go to File Manager. It's going to open it up in a new tab and you'll see your public_HTML. This is a new version of the File Manager, so in case something didn't work for you, you can go back to the dashboard, switch to the old dashboard on top right, search for File, and then click this File Manager right here. This one also has the public_HTML folder. Great. With that said, we can go back to the new File Manager and we can collapse it. As you can see, the export was successful and the files have been written to the out folder. So you can simply find it in your file tree by looking for out. And inside of here, we have all of the assets, static CSS and JS, and one index.html, inside of which our entire page is. What you can do is right-click it and then click Reveal in File Explorer or Finder if you're on Mac. Finally, you can go inside of the public_HTML, delete the PHP file if it's in there, and then go inside of the out folder, copy everything, and simply drag and drop it right here. This process is going to take less than a minute, and our website is going to be there. Heck, what a minute! It was about 5 seconds. And now that we have it, we can go back to our Hostinger's dashboard. You can then scroll down to Advanced and then SSL. It looks like my SSL certificate has been automatically activated, which means that I have HTTPS security. If yours hasn't been activated, you can activate it here, and if something doesn't work right, you can always contact the support. We can copy our URL from here and then paste it in our URL bar. And in just a couple of seconds, our website is live. We can now slowly scroll through it to see all of the phenomenal animations you have created. First, we have the About section, where we can read a bit more about metaverses. Then we can choose the world we want to explore, and we can choose the worlds by clicking on them, and then they're going to expand. Below that section, we have this planet that just comes in, and then we have another planet which rolls in a really funny way. Then if we scroll down, we have track friends all around the world, which looks great. Insights about Metaverse, which is some sort of a blog or article section. And then if we go down even further, we can see our word from the founder. And finally, we have a footer. This website is looking great. Congratulations on coming to the end of this video and for building it out. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like. If the video reaches 20,000 likes, we're recording more videos just like this one. With that said, don't forget to go to jsmastery.pro and visit our pro courses. If you like this video, you're going to love what's on there. With that said, it's been great having you for this entire video. I wish you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.